magic sparks. And you might come pass across the 6'4" chick flinging on vice box with a shower. You thought that's Candace Paul. She may be a lady Katie, past the Christy, cool as the AC, the ice princess. No right with the finish. She grab it like a line on the side, she take Chris. WNBA sparking, loving the best cause they all so hard. So now we going home.
Well, good evening, WNBA and LA Sparks fans, and welcome in to the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home for the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks, coming your way on the second official day of the WNBA preseason. We've got scores, highlights, and news from around the corner and around the league, alongside Chris Amansi via the Google Hangout from the Earnhardt Studios up in Anaheim, California. Callum McClure joining you here from Studio 171 in San Diego on our first edition of WNBA 365 preseason schedule central. Chris, good evening, man. And finally, we've got some basketball to talk about for the first time in months. Other than that, how's it going?
Another month. I'm just hanging here. So, excited today?
Yeah, man, it's about time we get basketball back on the menu here, folks. We had a slate of 3 games today. We'll get to all 3 of those games and, of course, recap the Sparks game from the day. And, of course, folks, a reminder again, the LA Sparks 365 Network will be hosting their first of 3 LAS 365 host meet and greet nights at the Sparks home opener on Sunday, June 14th at 2 o'clock p.m. Be sure to meet outside of the Chickern of the Star Plaza entryway on Chickern Court, facing LA Live, and of course come over and hang out with us too at the event on Sunday, June 14th. We'll have, of course, more about that later on. Well, Chris, there was some important business to be taken care of today at the Mohegan Sun Arena in Unicastable, Connecticut, Chris, where today, I should say, Chris, Brian Agler led the newly relooked LA Sparks into their first preseason game of the 2015 season, and Chris convincingly took the game today from the Chicago Sky, 76-67 from the Mohegan Sun Arena in Unicastable, Connecticut. Now, Chris, before we get to any numbers here, man, now obviously, as we know of, man, a lot of people, sort of doubting LA early in the preseason. Again, as we know, man, no Candace Parker, no Anna Dubovic, no Chrissy Tolliver for the first 7 to 10 games. And we are, everyone, Chris, a bit skeptical. Is this the time where Nneka Ogwumike establishes herself as the player that everyone has talked about her becoming? Jantel Lavender, having her second full year starting, Chris. And, of course, Chris, Aaron Phillips, the lethal weapon from beyond the arc, all the young kids, Chris. So I guess, man, your overall thoughts about your mindset, Chris, going into today's game, Chris, man, knowing there was no Parker, no Dubovic, no Tolliver, and yet, Chris, the Sparks went out there and played a terrific game today up there in Unicastable. What are your thoughts about the game beforehand, before we get to the numbers tonight for the game?
Just a very great Sparks win today. All around by the Sparks players, and just very great team win.
Chris, all-around team win, and it looks like, Chris. Now again, man, there's an old saying: don't judge the book by its cover. Because I know, Chris, that we've seen Minnesota get blown out. The Mercury got shellacked in Seattle a couple days ago. So again, we're not going to write off those teams after 1 or 2 preseason games, Chris. But the Sparks today, man, something that Shorty Mamba 24 brought up with Deborah and Vicky during the day, Chris, was a complete team effort that they did not have a lot of last season. Again, it looked like, Chris, that the team chemistry was completely destroyed last season. Not a lot of, it just was not the best of years last year. Where, Chris, new coach comes in, a new attitude, some tougher pressure from Magic Johnson as the owner of the franchise, and, Chris, a lot of roster shuffling, Chris, but it looked like, Chris, the puzzle pieces fit right in place today, Chris. Now, folks, if we go to the numbers from today's game, here you go as follows here. Sparks 76, Chicago 67, your final score from tonight. Your line score by quarter for the Sparks, 21 in the first, 17 in quarters 2 and 3, and 21 in the fourth for the game total of 76. For Chicago, 15 in the first, 17 in the second, 22 in the third, and 13 in the fourth for a game total of 67. Sparks box score across the board point-wise. Nneka Ogwumike, 15 points. Jantel Lavender, Aaron Phillips all had 11. Jen Lacey in 10 minutes put together 9 points. Faria Abdi as a starter today with 8 points in the ball game. Elena Beard and Tamika Johnson had 6. Jen Hampson, 4 points today. Mariana Tolo and Annalisa Pickrell, 3 points. Andrea Hoover, Nikki Green, and Sierra Burdick all saw action in the game today for the Sparks. For the Chicago Sky today, who see their preseason record falter to 1-1 on the year, Courtney Vandersloot, 15 points. Elena Deladon, 9 and 15 minutes played today, seeing a limited action in the preseason. Sasha Goodlett, 7 points. Cappy Pondexter, Jessica Breland all had 6. Bethany Laney also with 5 points. Jamira Faulkner, Victoria McCauley, and Tamara Young all with 4. Cheyenne Parker, Courtney Clements, and Marquisha Gatlin all with 2. And Clarissa Dos Santos with 1. Annie Quigley and Jackie Gemelos all held scoreless in the game today for Pokey Chapman. Now, Chris, to the Sparks, Chris. Now, as we know, man, we copied Ralph Lawler last year with the petition law, Chris, which, of course, is if the Sparks don't score 20 or more points in every quarter, they're not going to win the game. Chris, they did that twice tonight. They scored 21 in the first and fourth. And, Chris, the Sparks built a very sustainable lead, Chris, but a little bit, though, man, a couple of flashbacks to the last year, building that league and letting it slide late in the game, early third quarter, fourth quarter, which the Sky took their only lead of the game in the fourth quarter. So, Chris, overall, man, I know that it's preseason, yes, Chris, but above all, Chris, your thoughts, man, about Brian Agler getting every player on the roster at least a minute of action in the game tonight, knowing, again, that this is preseason, Chris. How do you think Brian Agler, Chris, and the coach staff handled this preseason game, Chris? Because Chris, I think they played the perfect game of getting every player involved in the action in some capacity here tonight. What do you think?
Just a very great job by Agler getting everyone like a minute or two and just handed a great job tonight.
Now, Chris, I would not be surprised if Brian Agler elected to start the younger kids tomorrow to let the big guns like Lav and Phillips and Eno sit out for a half or maybe just sit out the game, Chris. Again, this is the second preseason game. It doesn't mean a whole lot. They were playing the Connecticut Sun, who did thrash the Chinese national team today in the late game at the Mohegan-Sun Arena. But, Chris, okay, let's just go player by player here, Chris, for a while. Okay, first of all, Chris, of course, Nneka Ogwumike, Chris, who is now going to be the franchise player until Candace Parker comes back from her 7 to 10 game absence, Chris. Played a great game, played 27 minutes, went 7 to 12 from the field, took a 3-point attempt, which I'm a bit shocked at, missed it though, had 19 total, 10 total rebounds, 2 assists, a steal, 1 block, and 15 points. So obviously, Chris, you know that Agler will be relying heavily on Eno going forward. As we know, man, there is no Parker for at least 7 to 10 games, Chris. And I think that this is something, Chris, that we all were looking forward to. This is, Nneka's chance to really show why LA drafted her number 1 in 2012, Chris. At least seeing one game, Chris. I guess, Chris, can Nneka really fill Parker's shoes for those 7 to 10 games? Because right now, man, I think she's easily got that, on gridlock for those first few games. But what are your thoughts, though, about your go-to girl, filling in for my go-to girl for the first at least 7 games of the season? What do you think?
I think today, she played really great out there, filling in big shoes for Candace Parker, and I think she has it locked down before Candace Parker returns back.
Yeah, so I think, folks, I know that there's been a lot about Candace Parker. Folks, again, Parker is supposed to be missing the first 10 games of the year, at least 7 to 10 games. But again, Chris, both Nneka and Jantel Lavender, and Chris, even, not even Lav, Chris, Erin Phillips today as well. Also a great game. She finished with 11 points as well. Now, Chris, we know that Erin Phillips, wherever she's gone, Indy and or Phoenix, Chris, they both have won championships, 2012 and 2014, Chris. Erin Phillips in today's game, 31 minutes played, Chris, went 2 of 5 from the field, 2 of 3 from beyond the arc. Some of the Sparks lacked in last season, went 5 for 5 from the free throw line, Chris, and finished with 11 points. And obviously, Chris, her first shot, I was watching the game on the stat chart, Chris, first shot, a three-pointer, easy money, Chris. So obviously, man, LA probably wins the offseason for that one small little move where they, got Phillips, Chris, and hey, she brought her A game today, which was the three-point shooting from beyond the arc, Chris. How much does Erin Phillips' impact on today's game mean going forward for a department, Chris, the Sparks were flat out miserable in last season?
I think just very great. The Sparks brought Aaron Phillips over here to LA because we lacked on three-point shooting, and she pretty much brought it today. And like you said, wherever she's gone, they won a championship. Wherever she's gone, so you see.
Well, yeah, with that max deal, Chris, we'll see if the Sparks can take one during Aaron's tenure in Los Angeles. And of course, Chris, very quietly putting together a good game today, man. Jennifer Lacey, coming off the bench in 10 minutes, went 4 of 7 from the field today. I mean, had a tremendous game. Went 4 of 7, 1 for 3 from beyond the arc. Finished +8 in efficiency, Chris, and put up 9 points. Although Chris had 1 turnover and 4 fouls in the game. Now, Chris, they brought Jen in from Tulsa to be, better, the veteran leadership, but plus Chris adding some depth as well. And we know that Brian Nagler loves depth, but Chris, quietly, man, had a very good game and a very great second half going forward. What are your thoughts about Jen Lacey's very quiet but very good play tonight? Again, 9 points and only, Chris, 10 minutes of action tonight on the floor.
I think a very great depth. Another great big in the post that could kind of put a body on Griner and just very great.
Yeah, Chris, I don't think we'll see Jen guarding Griner because, Jen is only about 5'11", Chris. I don't know if that's going to be happening anytime soon, but we'll see what happens, though, Chris. And then Chris, probably one of the more weird / kind of surprising, let me say surprising, weird but surprising things, Chris. Faria Abdi got the starting nod today at forward for LA this afternoon, and quietly, Chris put together a solid game. She had in 23 minutes, Chris went 3 of 7, made a 3-pointer. Finished +13 in efficiency, had 2 rebounds, but also, Chris, more importantly, she had 2 steals late in the game when it was a very close contest. So, Chris, now we know that Abdi's been battling her way for playing time, Chris, and I think that with Brian Agler at least giving her the chance to play, I mean, that shows me something, Chris, that, Agler has faith, but Chris, she also brought her lunchbox and brought her A game to work today, man, had 2 big steals in a very close game towards the end, and, hey, had a couple of good shots. Field, Chris. So I guess, man, your thoughts, because we know that there's been a lot of talk about Abdi being one of these players kind of on the fence. After at least one game, what are your overall thoughts now on Abdi possibly being on the roster for at least part of the 2015 regular season?
Probably good, and she probably find a spot on the roster somewhere.
Chris, you were right. We have a tweet from Celine on the network. She says it's about time the rest of the players get to play. But, Chris, we all agreed, though, that, Chris, it is preseason. We know it is preseason, but, Chris, again, this is the time, man, where you have to evaluate the rookies, evaluate the draftees. And, again, so, of course, seeing everyone play, of course, always helps. Now, Chris, going to Tamika Johnson, 21 minutes played today in her second stint with Los Angeles. 21 minutes played, 2 of 7 from the field, a +3 in efficiency, and finished with 6 points today. Now, obviously, Chris, we know that Tamika is sadly one of the smaller players on the floor, Chris. But, Chris, her handle at Quick Deuce is not an obligation, man. She is very fast, brings her speed. And, of course, Chris, as we talked about, man, you knew when Seattle was let her go, man. You knew right away Brian Agler would jump on getting her to Los Angeles because, Chris, he knows what Meeks brings to the table, Chris. And, hey, she lives up to her. And, Chris, she does live up to her Twitter handle of @QuickDeuce on Twitter and Instagram, Chris. Your thoughts, man, okay, 6 points may not be a lot, but Chris, of course, helping out with her speed, up and down the floor, and, of course, a couple of big plays towards the end. What are your thoughts about Tamika Johnson beginning her second tour of duty with LA this season?
Wait, what?
Your thoughts about Tamika Johnson? Again, we know that this is her second time playing in LA, but of course, Chris, living up to that Twitter handle of @QuickDeuce, Chris, of being an extremely flashy and speedy player on the floor. What do you got?
She looks pretty much got there with Brian Agler knows her from Seattle and just ready.
Yeah, so Tamika Johnson also putting together a good game, and Chris. Chris, I think the one player we were all really intrigued on seeing, Chris, was the behemoth herself, Jennifer Hampson, man. 5 minutes played today, made both of her field goals, although finished -1 in efficiency, Chris. And, of course, a couple of trips to the Hampson block party up there in Unicasavo. Chris, this, Chris, was the one player I was waiting for desperately to get into the ball game, Chris, more so than my other go-to girl, Sierra Burdick, who we rock the aviator shades. But, Chris, Jen Hampson is the other player, Chris, we all wanted to see, man, and you knew right away when she got in, it spelt disaster for Chicago, Chris. As we know, man, Chris, Jen Hampson, again, is that one player we all wanted to see. Now, again, Chris, 4 points, but, of course, it's not just the points, man. It's the Hampson block party, man. Your thoughts about seeing Jen go out there and, play 5 minutes towards the end, put up a few points, but, of course, what's more importantly, though, man, bringing that defensive mentality to the team, though.
Just very great. She bringing the attitude and with blocking shots and everything, just getting that to when the season starts. And when she's out there for Phoenix, she could grind her in the post.
Chris, you do know that there are 10 other teams other than Phoenix in the league, right? She doesn't have to worry about Griner. She has to worry about other players too. So don't make it all about Phoenix, Chris, because there's more to the story than the Phoenix Mercury. Then, Chris, Mariana Toll got the nod at starting at center today. Chris, a rough day in her first game. 19 minutes played, 1 of 8 from the field, and 1 of 2 from the free throw line. -4 in efficiency. Chris also had 3 points. Now, of course, Chris, first year over here with Los Angeles, don't know a whole lot about her overseas, Chris, so, of course, we can wait for her to develop. And, of course, getting into the action, Chris, Chris, all 2 of the 3 Sparks draftees, along with a couple of signees, Chris, Annalisa Pickrell got into the ball game. She had 3 points in the ball game. Andrea Hoover had 6 minutes played, had no points. Nikki Green, 1 minute played, no points. And, of course, Chris, Sierra Burdick also got in the final minute of the game against Chicago. So, Chris, all around, man, what are as we kind of looked ahead towards tomorrow a little bit, I don't want to go too far ahead to tomorrow, Chris, but Chris, in your thoughts, man, now, as you know, man, that Brian Agler played Hoover, Burdick, and Pickrell all limited minutes in tonight's game. So, Chris, what are your thoughts, though, about those 3 players specifically going forward to tomorrow? Where, Chris, this is the final preseason game where it's like one of the last chances for the rookies or draftees to really make their mark, Chris. Do you believe that Brian Agler would elect to start those young players tomorrow instead of starting the regular starting 5 to really evaluate who is thinking who's going for final cuts before the season begins next Saturday?
Yeah, I think probably we're going to see the rookies starting the game, so Brian Agler could see, evaluate even more to see, like you said, who stays on the roster or who gets cut.
So I think we all can sort of agree here that I believe that tomorrow will be the day when you're playing for your job. Tomorrow will be moving day for some of the players on the Sparks roster. And I think, Chris, probably for everyone on the roster across the league in their last preseason game. But again, folks, more importantly, final score of the day in Connecticut, Sparks 76, Chicago 67. We had 2 more games on the schedule today in the WNBA preseason. The early game this morning, one of the early games this morning, the Atlanta Dream in New York defeated the New York Liberty today by the final score of 82 of trying to get the final score here, folks. Give me a brief moment here. Had a little bit of a glitch. But the final score, 85-72, Atlanta over New York today at Madison Square Garden. We'll just run through the numbers real quick here for the final score in the ball game for the Dream across the board today. 21, 23, 24, and 17 for a game total of 85. And for the Liberty, 19, 20, 13, and 20 for a game total of 72. Erica Wheeler and Angel McCautry all finished with 13 points today. Erica DeSouza, 12. Sancho Little, 9. Tiffany Hayes, 8. Shoni Schimmel also had 8. Matee Ajavan, 6. Sequoia Holmes had 5. Samantha Logic, 4. Nadia Colhado had 3. Iffy Abike had 2, along with Ronika Hodges, Martha Ali, and Anika Henry, all with no points for Atlanta. For the Libs today, in the ball game this morning and afternoon, Tina Charles at 12, Rebecca Allen and Sugar Rogers all with 11, Essence Carson 10, Kia Stokes 9, Carolyn Swords 5, Tanisha Wright, Avery Wally Talbert, and Brittany Boyd all with 4. And hey, a familiar name for me, Candace Wiggins with 2 points today in 13 minutes of action from the free throw line. Janice McKinney, Swin Cash, Amber Orange, and Chelsea Hopkins all held scoreless in the ball game. And Chris, we should mention, by the way, too, Angel McCautry left the game early tonight with a pretty severe, but otherwise she's all right, but a pretty significant ankle injury in today's game. Other final tonight in the WNBA preseason, the Mystics walloped the Lynx 89-63, final score across the board for Minnesota. 25 in the first, 17 in the second, 10 in the third, and 11 in the fourth for a game total of 63. And for the Mystics, 18 in the first, 25 in the second, 29 in the third quarter, and 17 in the fourth for a game total of 89. Lindsay Whalen and Rashana Gray with 10 to lead the way for Minnesota. Simone Augustus had 8. Maya Moore and Damaris Dantas with 7. Jennifer O'Neill also with 7. Asia Taylor and Deborah Peters with 4. Monica Wright and Tricia Liston with 2. And Shea Kelly had 2. Amber Harris held scoreless for Minnesota in a losing effort this afternoon. And for the Washington Mystics this afternoon from the Brighton Center, Taylor Hall 18, Emma Mieseman 11, along with Kara Lawson with 11. Bria Hartley and Natasha Cloud with 10. Kalena Green had 9. Kia Vaughn with 8. Stephanie Dawson 6. Allie Mallett with 4. Kayla Thornton with 2. And Blake Dietrich with no points in the win for the Mystics. And finally tonight in the WNBA, the Connecticut Sun routed the Chinese Olympic national team by the final totals of 86 to 65 for the Sun in the ball game. For the Sun in the ballgame, they had 25 in the first, 16 in the second, 26 in the third, and 19 in the fourth for a game total of 86. And for the Chinese National Olympic team, 13-19, 14-19 for the game total of 65. Jie Bao Jin, the leading scorer for China, with 18 points in the ballgame. For the Sun in the game today with the victory, Alex Bentley and Elisa Thomas with 18 apiece, Chelsea Gray 10, Kelsey Bone 8, Jasmine Thomas 7, Elizabeth Williams, Elisa Brewer, and Shakina Strickland all with 6, Kelly Ferris with 3, Dee Dee Simmons with 2, Camille Little with 2, Kayla Peterson held scoreless for the Sun this afternoon. There's a full slate of games on the WNBA preseason docket tomorrow, beginning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific Time, Tulsa at San Antonio, 12:30 p.m. Seattle at Phoenix, 2 o'clock China in Chicago, and at 4 o'clock the Sparks and Sun from the Mohegan Sun Arena to wrap up the LA Sparks' 2015 preseason schedule. Now, Chris, before we cut out of here for the night, the Sparks and Sun last year, the Sparks took both games. They took the game in Connecticut, and of course, Chris had that wild and woolly, alas, 5-0 run to cap the game in LA last August on a Chrissy Tolliver game-winning 3 with 5 seconds left in a wacky last 30 seconds there where the Sparks finished down 3, or we're down 5. Candace Parker with a big putback to make it a 2-point game, and then a steal off the inbound where it was one sister taking the ball from another sister where Chris Tolliver buried the 3 to put the Sparks in for good in the last who had the last game. By the way, folks, the injury was Angel McCautry from Atlanta. Ankle injury suffered earlier today from the game with the Liberty and Dream at MSG this morning. So, Chris, going forward, man, now, as we know, man, Brian Agler may not play this game. Chris, probably I'd say this, Chris. And Chris, I would, and Chris, and in 21 years of me being around sports, never would I say, Chris, this is the game you don't play to win. Chris, Herm Edwards, who went to the SDSU, would be up my ass right now saying, no, dude, you play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. Chris, this is preseason game 2, and also, man, come on, Chris, you got to give, as we said, man, and we all agree here, this is where you have to give the young kids that chance This is probably, Chris, maybe their last opportunity to play pro basketball over here, Chris, before they probably end up going overseas, going to a new team, Chris. So, Chris, if you were in Brian Agler's shoes right now, over in Connecticut, at the hotel and casino, sleeping right now at 1:30 in the morning, and you're thinking about your game plan for this game, Chris, what do you think? Do you go with the big guns for the first quarter, the first half, or what are you thinking, man, that Brian Agler, Amber Stocks, and Kurt Miller do for this last preseason tilt? Do you start the starters for a few minutes, for a half, and then you bring in the young kids, or do you say, take a back seat, and we're going to let all the rooks and maybe some of the vets play tomorrow, Chris? What are your thoughts about this right now as you think about Game 2 tomorrow at 4 o'clock versus Connecticut?
I think let the starters play a little bit to get them ready for the season to go. And then after that, just let the rookies play to their last chance to show off what they got and to see if they make the cut or not.
Yeah, Chris, I think that this is a game that Brian Agler really looks at and says, who knows what really happens. Chris, one more tweet from Celine at LovePride80. Chris, she tweets, very surprised that Griner was playing. We should be able to watch the preseason as well. Chris, this is something, Chris, and also, folks, by the way, I wanted to get to this, but Chris, I had news broken to me from Jessica, Chris, not the one you see listed up on the Wall of Fame, Chris, but who operates the Diana Taurasi Bun page on Twitter, Chris, who says that, Chris, what she's heard from reports that both Griner and Johnson, Chris, are going to be appealing their 7-game suspensions for their punishment for their arrest back on April 22nd in Maricopa County. Chris, I mean, frankly, man, okay. I know that this is like an uphill climb, Chris, hey, the WNBA got it right, but Chris, I think you just take the punishment. I mean, at this point in time, Chris, is it really worth, dragging out this appeal process, because, Chris, I've been a part of this sort of stuff, man, with, with some players that I've been with, that I've worked with, who've been suspended, Chris, and it is a long process, man, to have the arbitrator review the case, hear statements, man. So I guess, Chris, in your mind, Chris, is it a bit shocking though that the WNBA is letting Griner play in the preseason at all, or does it really even matter that hey, it's preseason, let her play because she's going to miss the first 7 games? Or your thoughts about this going forward?
Pretty much. Look here, because it's only preseason. It doesn't even count to the regular season, so it's only the preseason.
Chris, one tweet from Crystal Thomas at Pup1010. She chimes in saying they shouldn't be allowed to play. They made their own bed. They made their bed and they have to lay in it. And Chris, I agree. I mean, because Chris, the appeal process, man, it takes forever, Chris. Because I've been on, or Chris, I've had friends on teams I've played for that have been suspended by the league, Chris. The process, man, takes forever. And Chris, to drag it out, it's almost like, hey, you did it, take the punishment, and move on from here is what I'll say for it. But again, folks, what we've heard, it's unconfirmed right now, but reports in from Jessica and Reno, who operates the Diana Taurasi Bun page on Twitter. Both Brittany Griner and Gloria Johnson are expected to appeal their 7-game suspension from the league for their arrest back in April of this year. With that, folks, for the first preseason game of 2015 WNBA season on May 27th, 2015, from the Mohegan Sun Arena in Utica, Connecticut, your LA Sparks take home the victory over the Chicago Sky, 76-67. Next game is tomorrow at 4 o'clock Pacific, when the Sparks will take on the Connecticut Sun from the Mohegan Sun Arena in Unica, Connecticut. Chris, we get ready to wrap up for the night, man. Your final thoughts on game one of game 1 of the preseason, and your thoughts about game 2 going forward to tomorrow.
Great all-around team win for the Sparks in the first preseason, 2015. Just all-around great team victory with Nneka Ogwumike trying to fill her big shoes without Candace Parker to be out for the season, beginning of the season, and then Jantel Lavender also putting in double-digit points today with a double-double. Aaron Phillips bringing in the veteran, that great 3-point depth that we lack, but sometimes mostly with KT going overseas. So great for Aaron Phillips, and just can't wait for tomorrow for game 2 of the preseason before the season starts.
Chris, some more viewer interaction here. I'm going to get to those, and I'm going to get to these tweets right now from Shorty and Celine again, as we had talked about before we wrapped up here again. We had unconfirmed reports from Jessica, who operates the Diana Taurasi Bun page on Twitter today. Again, reports of both Brittany Griner and Glory Johnson both appealing their suspension, their 7-game suspensions for the altercation at their house back in April in Goodyear, Arizona. Celine says no, they both should have thought about hitting each other. I feel that 7 games out of their luck, they didn't get kicked out of the league. One more tweet from Shorty Mamba 24 on Twitter. She did chime in as well, trying to pull it up here. Shorty does write in saying, as soon as I can pull it up, she says, I doubt they are granted an appeal, but they can go for it, close tweet. So again, we will definitely let the fans debate about that. But with that, folks, we have gone over the cliff here. We're sorry about that. But folks, till tomorrow night when we come back here to recap more WNBA action. Thanks for tuning in and joining us here tonight on LES. Chris, what do you got?
Also, Maria on Facebook, she says, oh, wow, yeah, take advantage.
All right, with that, folks, and once more, we kind of need to wrap up here. We are over our 30-minute time frame, folks. We'll be back here tomorrow night with more talk coming up at 10 o'clock tomorrow night back here on LES 365. But until tomorrow night, please have a safe night. Drive home safely. And Chris, we cannot, Chris, I thought our FaceTime sessions would never end when we try to sign off, but we'll get to, okay, folks, one more tweet here, and then we have to really stop for the night here because I do have things to do for school, folks. One more tweet from Celine. She says domestic abuse is no game, and specifically in our community, speaking as a victim, hitting and snap is not cool. All right, so obviously tough one to swallow there.
And also, Maria also just says right now, that's right, pill it, never hurts to try.
Okay, folks. We apologize, folks. We do have to run, but we will. But again, folks. But again, please come back. I kind of, I'll do a sign of the cross. Please come back. But folks, we are out of time here. We have to, stop this, and we will come back tomorrow, folks. Again, we only have 30 minutes here, folks. Sorry, but we don't go a whole hour here, just 30 minutes. But again, we'll be back tomorrow night, 10 o'clock p.m., recapping more of the action across the WNBA with more games tomorrow, and of course, Sparks and Sun 4 o'clock tomorrow. Not on television. Won't be on TV. We'll have more about that later on. But again, Sparks and Sun tomorrow on WNBA.com/schedule. With that, folks, for Chris Mancy in Anaheim and Cal Miller down here in San Diego, have a safe night. Drive home safely. Thank you all for coming in, tweeting in, and joining us tonight. And good night now. This has been the LA Sparks 365 Network. We are Sparks. We are LA. We are the WNBA. We'll see you folks back here tomorrow night, 10 o'clock p.m. with more talk about the WNBA. And we will gladly take more tweets and Facebook posts tomorrow night. Back here on LES 365 for Chris in Anaheim, Cal in San Diego signing off. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.